If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe.
December 30th, 1916. St. Petersburg is frozen solid. A body is being pulled out from under the frozen surface of the Neva River. Rope marks on his wrists, bullet wounds on his chest. But the detail that will really make your skin crawl is this. According to rumor, his lungs were full of water, meaning this man was still trying to breathe even after being poisoned, shot, and thrown into the icy river. First, they poisoned him. He didn't die. Then they shot him. Still, he didn't die. And in the end, they tied him up and threw him into the freezing water. I mean, what do you even do with someone like that? Killing him turned into an outright nightmare for his murderers. So who was he? This man who seemed almost impossible to kill? A saint? A healer? Or a charlatan, quietly rotting an entire empire from within? Welcome back to Historical Gossip, dear friends. If you've freshened up your tea or coffee, lean back, because today we're going to the darkest, most rotten days of Tsarist Russia. Last time, we talked about Wu Zetian's steel fist inside a silk glove. Remember? Well, this time, the shadow behind the curtain isn't a woman. It's a Siberian peasant with tangled hair and beard, whose gaze pierces right through you. His name? Grigori Rasputin. If we're ready, let's begin. Our story begins in 1869, in a muddy, forgotten Siberian village, Pokrovskoye. When Rasputin was born, nobody expected anything from him. Even his reading and writing was doubtful. He was an ordinary peasant, known for drinking, fighting, and theft. Not exactly the resume of a future holy man. So much so that some say even his surname comes from a root meaning debauched, immoral in Russian. Whether that's true or a folk invention is debatable, but looking at the man's youth, it doesn't seem all that out of place. Then, in his 30s, something happens. According to some, a dream. According to others, a monastery he visited. Rasputin declares he's had a religious awakening, picks up his staff, and hits the road. He sets out on pilgrimages that stretch for kilometers, tours monasteries, meets with monks. The most interesting part is this. Despite all these journeys, he never officially becomes even a priest. But this was no obstacle at all to people seeing him as a holy man. And on top of that, he develops an extremely convenient philosophy. Oh, you're going to love this one. To truly repent, a person must first sink into sin. Meaning, sinning and then feeling remorse, meaning sinning, and then feeling remorse brings a person even closer to God. What a comfortable theory, isn't it? Every glass you drink, every bed you get into, all of it a kind of spiritual investment. But the strange thing is, people believed this. Because Rasputin had a talent. He would look into your eyes in such a way that the person across from him felt stripped, stark naked. When his fame spread from village to village and reached the gates of the capital, St. Petersburg, the city's bored aristocrats, hungry for mysticism, were absolutely smitten with this wild-looking Siberian. Now picture this. The Russian high society of that era spent its days and nights with mediums, fortune-tellers, and self-proclaimed holy healers. These were the indispensable guests of aristocratic homes. So honestly, Rasputin arrived at exactly the right time. Rasputin fell right into the middle of such an environment. An exotic, holy man, dressed like a peasant, speaking prophecies and healing the sick. But the thing that really opened the big door for him was the palace's most secret, most painful secret. Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra had a son they'd waited many long years for, the heir, Alexei. However, the little prince had been born with a deadly illness, hemophilia. His blood wouldn't clot. Even the thinnest scratch could bring him to the brink of death. The palace's best doctors had helplessly thrown up their hands. And it was exactly at that moment of despair that a desperate mother brought Rasputin into the picture. According to what's told, Rasputin came to the child's bedside, prayed in a low voice, talked, calmed him, and the bleeding stopped. Not just once, but many times. Science explains this more logically today. Rasputin was probably calming the child and having the doctors stop the aspirin they'd given in a panic, which thinned the blood. But in that age, in that palace, there was only one word for this: a miracle. And from that moment on, for Alexandra, Rasputin was not an ordinary monk, but the very person God had sent to save her son. Anyone who wanted to harm him was automatically the Tsarina's enemy. Believe me, this little detail was important enough to bring about the end of an entire dynasty. Gossip alarm! Let's stop right here and talk openly. Was Rasputin really the Tsarina's lover? Let's be honest. No serious evidence we have confirms this. Alexandra was an extremely devout woman, wholeheartedly devoted to her husband. Her attachment to Rasputin was most likely not that of a lover, but that of a desperate mother who had entrusted her fatally ill child to him. But in history, sometimes what's decisive isn't what the truth is. It's what people choose to believe. In that period, the Russian people looked at a Tsarina who handed her son over to a peasant, consulted him on state decisions, and saw just one word: disgrace. Newspapers drew him as a horned devil, and the rumor, the mad monk, the Tsarina's lover, spread from mouth to mouth. But wait, there's the other side of the coin. The moment he left the palace, the holy man turned into a completely different person. He drank until he passed out in taverns, lived scandals with women that spread from mouth to mouth. And honestly, this part didn't exactly help him. In fact, one police report says that in a restaurant in Moscow, drunk on top of the tables, he shouted out the outrageous things between him and the Tsarina. Basically, pouring gasoline on the fire, right? Once a rumor lands on the public's tongue, there's no way to take it back. And it wasn't just the public either. The church accused him of heresy. The priests hated him. Even Prime Minister Stolypin reported directly to the Tsar and warned, "This man is dangerous." So, what did Nicholas do? He didn't listen. For his son's health, for his wife's peace of mind, he closed his eyes. At one point, Rasputin was even exiled. But, at Alexandra's insistence, he came back in a hurry. The man had officially become untouchable. Then, the worst timing in history kicked in. The First World War. Tsar Nicholas went to the front to take command of the armies. So, to whom did he entrust the entire empire? His wife. And whom did Alexandra consult on every decision? Rasputin, of course. This is exactly where things spiraled out of control. With a single word from Rasputin, ministers were dismissed, and men with no merit but loyal to him were put in their place. As the war went badly, as the people starved to death at the front and in the factories, the fate of the whole of Russia had been left to the whims of a peasant who could barely read and write. The nobles were going crazy. Who is a Siberian peasant to be running the empire? If you ask me, Rasputin was neither the demonic genius the public thought he was, nor the pure saint his followers believed in. He was an extremely cunning and charismatic opportunist who had popped up at the right time, right beside the right desperation. In fact, he was a mirror of that rotten palace. If that rotten order hadn't existed, such a man could never have risen so high. Sometimes, what changes history isn't genius. It's just standing in front of the right door at the right moment. December 1916. Led by the son of one of the country's richest families, the young and handsome Prince Felix Yusupov, a group of nobles, among them Duma member Purishkevich and the Tsar's relative, Grand Duke Dmitri, decided to get rid of Rasputin. They invited him one midnight to the basement of Yusupov's palace on the pretext of supposedly meeting the prince's beautiful wife. Yeah, nothing suspicious about that at all. And now, the most unbelievable murder scene in history begins. First, they offered him cakes and wine laced with cyanide, enough poison to bring down even an elephant. Rasputin ate it all with relish, sipped his wine, and nothing happened. He kept smiling and sitting there. Can you imagine the look on their faces? The assassins looked at each other in a panic. Finally, Yusupov drew his pistol and shot him in the chest. Rasputin collapsed to the floor. He's finally dead, they thought. But when Yusupov leaned over the body to check it, Rasputin suddenly opened his eyes. He grabbed the prince's throat, got to his feet, and started running toward the garden. They shot him many more times, beat him, then tied him up and hurled him into the icy Neva. But let's tell the edgic too. A big part of this man who wouldn't die legend comes from the memoirs written years later by the killer himself, Yusupov. The man may well have loved presenting himself to history as a hero that night. Modern researchers who've looked at the autopsy reports, on the other hand, paint a different picture. Barely a trace of poison. The real cause of death? Most likely a bullet fired into the head at close range. Meaning a big part of that dramatic "he was still breathing under the ice" scene was nothing but legend. But let's admit it. The truth itself was dark enough not to need any embellishment. And now we come to the part that will really give you goosebumps. According to the story, shortly before he died, Rasputin left a letter for the Tsarina. In the letter, it roughly said this: If one of the common people kills me, you and your children have nothing to fear. But if your own relatives, nobles from the palace, kill me, within 2 years, neither you nor any of your children will be left alive. So, who killed Rasputin? Precisely, nobles from the palace, from the Tsar's own relatives. Whether he really wrote this letter, or whether it was made up after his death to grow his legend, we'll never know for sure. But what happened, happened. Only a few months after his death, 1917, the revolution broke out. The Tsar was removed from the throne, and before long, the entire Romanov family, including Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and little Alexei he'd risked everything to save, was shot in a basement. And here's the bitter irony. The people who killed Rasputin thought they were saving the empire. But they saved nothing. Because Rasputin wasn't the disease itself. He was only its most visible symptom. The palace was already rotten. He simply exposed the wound. Looking back today, it's almost impossible to describe Rasputin in a single sentence. He was neither fully a saint nor fully a devil. Probably somewhere in between. An extraordinary character who understood people's fears and hopes better than almost anyone. He went down in history as the man who walked out of the Siberian mud with nothing but a staff, and became forever linked to the collapse of an empire. Because history teaches us something facing. Sometimes people become immortal, not because of what they actually did, but because of the stories people kept telling about them. Ooh, but wait. This story still has one more layer. And I haven't told you that part yet. Some historians claim there was one more name inside Yusupov's basement that night. A British intelligence agent. Yes, you heard that right. There are people who genuinely believe Britain may have had a hand in Rasputin's death. Now that's a conspiracy worth talking about. But I'm saving that dark theory, every fascinating detail of it, for the next video. And trust me, you do not want to miss that one. Here on Gossip Alarm, the palace gossip cauldron is still bubbling. So if you enjoy these unbelievable, dark, but absolutely real stories, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications. Take very good care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.